Hey everyone, welcome back to the Brain Soul Success Show. You are in for a real treat today. I have with me my friend Jeff Krasno. He is the co-founder and CEO of Commune. It's a masterclass platform for personal and societal well-being. He hosts the Commune podcast, interviewing a wide variety of luminaries from Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, Matthew McConaughey. Oh my gosh. Gabor Mate, Jeff Penn's a personal weekly essay titled how do you say that? Commusings.
You got it.
Commusings. I love that. That explores spirituality, wellness, and culture and is distributed to over 1 million subscribers every Sunday. Jeff's the creator of Good Stress. It's a collection of wellness protocols that he developed to reverse his own diabetes, lost 60 pounds, reclaimed his health at age 50. Good Stress is available as an online course. It's being developed into a book and a TV series. Good for you. I love this, Jeff. I'm so excited to be with you today and all the good work that you're doing in the world. And it's not really talked about. We don't talk about stress as being good, do we?
No, we don't. And for good reason, Louise. And first of all, thanks so much for hosting me. And it's a pleasure to connect with you and to the community that you're building. It's really fantastic. Yeah, I mean, stress in the modern era is generally associated with distress, right? So bad
Mm-hmm.
stress. And this is a crucial delineation to make because we actually evolved with some health conferring Paleolithic good stresses.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, in modern life, which is characterized by endless pressure and fear and judgment, and nonstop 24-hour news and social media, et cetera, we essentially experience life as if we're being chased by some odd-toed ungulate all the time.
Yes.
And we never have an opportunity to emotionally regulate it and bounce back to center. So this chronic IV drip of stress is really deleterious to, both our psychology and our physiology. I think a lot of your audience is probably familiar with sort of the endocrine cascade that's associated with bad stress.
Right.
There's obviously the steroid hormone cortisol, which a lot of people are familiar with. And cortisol is actually shouldn't be completely villainized because it's a wonderful hormone in the right doses at the right time. We have a natural cortisol wave in the morning, which gets sleepyhead out of bed and helps him and her confront the day, and is an important hormone for alertness. But of course, when we're chronically stimulated and we have chronically activated cortisol, that degrades the immune system, it degrades the gut. It obviously triggers glucose from the liver and sends it to your extremities because you're ready to fight and fly, right?
Right.
But of course, when that never goes away, we experience all of these detrimental knock-on impacts. But okay, so that's bad stress. That's modern distress.
Mm-hmm.
But we actually evolved with these good health conferring Paleolithic stressors. So, for example, we were designed to deal with a certain amount of like food scarcity, right? Because, we had periods of abundance on the Serengeti, and then we had, winter's fallow. And the body is just this, unbelievable miracle that basically evolved all these mechanisms in relation to its environment. So we were around for hundreds of thousands of years and our hominid ancestors for millions of years developing this kind of engineering. And we were actually engineered to be fat just a little bit in the fall and in the late summer
Mm-hmm.
because guess what was around the corner? A scarcity of calories related to winter's fallow. So, you know,
Makes sense.
so we were actually designed to store energy in the form of fat at a certain time of year. But then what happens when culture essentially hijacks our biology, takes our miraculous adaptive mechanisms and makes them maladaptive. Well, when you supply the body with an endless abundance of a surfeit of nutrient deficient refined grains and refined sugars, etc., what
Mhm.
do? We do what we're designed to do, which is store fat. But of course, when we do that nonstop, you get an obesity epidemic. 45% of Americans are now obese, and I think 11 or 12% are morbidly obese. And, this is really, our genetics haven't changed. In the 60s, that number was 5%. So, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but over the last 70 years, our genes really haven't changed at all. So what can you point to? Well, you point to culture and lifestyle, essentially the way we live our lives. And,
Mhm.
all these chronic diseases as they relate to the brain as well, which is obviously, your area of expertise, but these neurodegenerative diseases and dementia, and Alzheimer's, et cetera, a lot of people are talking about them as metabolic diseases now. So
Yes.
we're seeing this massive cresting wave of dementia. And in many ways, what you're seeing in these kind of autopsies of hippocampal tissue, and et cetera, is, insulin resistance, and the inability to essentially use substrates like glucose for the creation of energy. So then you get this brain energy problem. And so, this
Mhm.
is an example of essentially like evolutionary mismatches that have started to characterize our modern era. And what I say is like, the source of chronic disease is really chronic ease. It's this abundance that we have all the
The
time, all this
abundance.
endless comfort.
Ah, that's a great point, Jeff. Yes. You know what I see on my neurobiofeedback programs, and when I work with people with brain issues, is the sugar issue. It's
Mm,
digestion of sugar, it's the glucose, because everything really does turn to sugar. And I know you know that very well, with your story on sugar. So I see Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and all of that as that metabolism of sugar and glucose. And also, I see it as the traumas that got stuck in the spaces of the brain.
mm.
So I clear trauma, but I clear it at the brain soul level. And so what I found that many of those people are holding on to childhood wounds or things that are stuck, and it's taking up space in the brain. And so that's the spiritual cause. The physical cause is that metabolism, how they're metabolizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, metabolism is an interesting word because I try to apply it, um, you know, sort of loosely. I mean, obviously we think about metabolism as, you know, all of the chemical reactions in the body that take food substrates and convert them into energy, et cetera. But there's also, one has the ability to metabolize trauma.
Mhm.
And, if you can move through the trauma, right? And you create essentially openness and pathways for that trauma to essentially integrate. But of course, just like when you have an overabundance of sugar in your diet, your metabolism is compromised. When you
Mhm.
have, an overabundance of neglect or, you know, toxicity or racism or abuse, it becomes harder and more difficult to essentially metabolize that trauma. And we
Mhm.
need to obviously engage in a lot of inventory. And fortunately, there seems to be more tools available kind of coming online now with psychedelic therapy and ketamine assisted therapy, and obviously the work that you're doing to help people essentially move through that trauma, and to heal wounds, such that they can be more available.
Right, absolutely. And being more available, that's a very good point. Because I know you went through a journey too, and at the time that you were not feeling well, you probably were not feeling available. You weren't feeling like 100% yourself. So share that with us because you have a powerful story. What happened and how long ago was that?
Yeah. Um, So prior to starting Commune, I was the founder and the CEO of a company called Wanderlust. It was um, just a wonderful and awful time of my life, kind of at the same time.
Mm.
Wanderlust was a series of wellness events that spread across the world. Sorry, one second. These events like that spread all across the world, and that we brought together some of like the greatest teachers and thought leaders and authors, and it was wonderful. We were doing very, very large scale events, but my life was constantly on an airplane. There was a tremendous amount of pressure involved because these events were incredibly labor intensive and very capital intensive. So I was always raising money and running around doing partnerships and sponsorships and et cetera. And of course, it was ironic because here I was in the wellness industry, but experiencing myself as patently unwell. And
Mhm.
in 2018, I sold the company and really spiraled into a depression. Um, I was significantly overweight, but I had all of these other kind of symptoms that are just so common that we've accepted them as normal, but they're completely abnormal. I mean, and I'm sure you come across these all the time, Louise. I mean, I had,
Mhm.
wicked brain fog, just chronic fatigue, just tired all the time. I was irritable. I couldn't concentrate. I mean, I think I read in 2017 a grand total of 0 books. Um, and then, I had, some physical presentations that were certainly insulting to my vanity. I started to grow these little brown skin tags in my armpits, which I later found out was a kind of a presentation of insulin resistance and diabetes. I had, what my wife nicely refers to as gynecomastia, but the rest of the world knows as man boobs. Um, and not necessarily A cups. Um, and so, I was just, you know, in a place of rock bottom. I mean, there was also some other psychological components to it. I mean, my life and my identity was very much based on what I did and sort of the exalted status I had in my little corner of the universe as CEO of this company and with, 200 employees and 68 events and 20 countries and all this stuff. Um, and then I didn't have that anymore. And so there was a, a forced interoception, like, who am I?
Mhm.
And as I stared into the mirror, I did not like who I saw, both physically and psychologically. Then I started to, my friend had started this company called Levels, which is a continuous glucose monitor company. So I actually wear one for the people watching this on video. I have a little
Mm.
disc on my triceps
Oh, cool.
that
Uh-huh.
I wear, and that links with an app, and that gives me a dashboard into my blood glucose moment to moment. And it's a very useful tool, though it's easy to become obsessed with it. But I don't suggest that one does. But I put it on and I stared into the app, and I was agog, really, that my fasting glucose levels were 125 milligrams per deciliter. So that might not mean very much to most people, but that is on the very, very highest end of prediabetes and on the lower end of diabetes. And I went
Mm.
to my primary care physician, and she gave me a hemoglobin A1C test, which is generally in a panel that you'll get when you go, if you go to see your internist. And there you had it. I had like a hemoglobin A1C of about 6.7%. So again, that was kind of in the lower end of the diabetic spectrum. And I was like, whoa, me? Like, I'm in the wellness industry. I eat organic food. I've like raised my daughters well. I pay my taxes, damn it. Like, I can't be a diabetic. What? I can't have a chronic disease. Um, but I woke up to the fact that, again, that is abnormally normal in our society. I mean, there's,
Hmm.
12% of Americans now have diabetes, and another 38 to 40% have prediabetes, and 90% of those people are undiagnosed. And, this is right barely upstream from, heart disease, cancer, stroke, dementia. In fact, dementia, as I'm sure you know, is now often referred to as type 3 diabetes,
Yes.
due to essentially the neurons in your brain and their inability to actually make energy, at the subcellular level. So that was me in 2019, 2020, even. So not even really that long ago.
Hmm.
And, you know, once I learned that I had an official diagnosis, it really propelled me into a place of what I call me search, or I became kind of an N1 experiment. And fortunately, I had developed relationships with really some of the most prolific functional and integrative medicine doctors in the world. And I, embarked on this kind of period of autodidactic learning on my podcast and on Commune. And I've interviewed maybe 500 doctors kind of over the last 4 years, and have made, courses on brain health and metabolism um, and autoimmune disease, and with, everyone from Dr. Mark Hyman to Casey Means and Sarah Gottfried and David Perlmutter and et cetera. So,
Hmm.
and over that period, basically did a tremendous amount of experimentation, and as you know, Louise, this world is full of advice. So, what I call kind of sifting through the grifting of the wellness industry was certainly part of my journey, and all the mushrooms and modalities and pills and praxis, and, jumping into 40-degree water while you're, saying a mantra on a pomegranate fast or whatever. I really did
Yeah.
experiment with quite a few things. Um, and then, found some candidly very old and true protocols that I began to apply and stack into my life. And, the results were pretty miraculous, just across my body, mind, and affected every part of my life. And, you know, we so often associate health with downward spirals. And
Hmm.
certainly there are downward spirals, but there are also, the good news, the gospel is there are upward spirals. And as I began to adopt certain protocols, combine them in interesting ways, I started to experience upward spirals in my life. And, you know, I apologize for this, but our DNA is 99.9% the same. But, and we all are bio-individual. Everything is different for a lot of people, but there are general principles that can apply, to all of us. And so, yeah, now I'm, on a mission to share some of those principles, such that people can really get that information and apply it to themselves and take agency over their own health, and really bend the arc of their life. So uh, that's my story in a nutshell.
Wow. I mean, I love your insights, and I appreciate your sense of humor. Let me say that too. I'm really loving your insights. Protocols. When you talk about protocols, give us one tip, because I went down a similar journey, only I crashed. So I was
Hmm.
oxygen for 3 years. I was 89 pounds and dying. And so
Ooh.
three autoimmune diseases. So, and I lost my brain power at the time. I had been a special ed teacher before that. So I kind of say I taught those kids became like the kids I taught, which is kind of true. So that's how I became a brain expert. But I too went down that kind of journey. And I love how you talk about upward spiral, because I never thought of that when I was going through it. I love that, Jeff. That's so
Yeah.
awesome. So yeah, what's a tip, a protocol that you say, hey, you know what? We're all like different, but we still have we're still people, we're still mammals, we still have to eat, we still have to sleep, we still have to poop. We, we have to do all those things. So, what are some like across the board kind of tips that you might give somebody who might be on a similar journey?
Yeah. Well, before I get into specific ones, I'll just give you more of a general one.
Okay.
I mentioned this earlier. You know, we are not fixed products. That's not what this organism is. We are processes, changing moment to moment in relation to our environment. The Buddha said that, and then quantum physics said that, and now we're learning that through neuroplasticity and epigenetics and the microbiome, et cetera. And if you accept that, then you know y- you really want to look at how this engineering of the human organism came to be. And like I said before, it evolved in relation to its environment, to its exposome, to the
Mhm.
total amount of exposures that we have in our life.
Mhm.
And so what I became very focused on is living in alignment with how I evolved. Like going back
Mhm.
and thinking about how did we live 12,000 years ago before there was really any dementia or Alzheimer's, before there was any metabolic disease, before there was any heart disease, before there was really very much cancer. There was a little cancer back then, but not much.
Mhm.
And so that was the question that I asked myself. How do I live a little bit more like my Paleolithic ancestor? And
Nice.
once I started to kind of ask that question, the answers really revealed themselves, to be honest. So, for example, we talked about food for a second before.
Mhm.
So my Paleolithic ancestors did experience periods of food scarcity. So now, how could I self-impose periods of food scarcity in order to give my body an opportunity to repair and restore and not just grow? Okay, so for
Mhm.
me, that became an intermittent fasting protocol. So I began to consolidate all my consumption of food in an 8-hour window. That's often known as the 16-8 protocol. Now,
Mhm.
this protocol isn't for everyone, certainly for women going through menopause or if you're menstruating or gestating, et cetera. You want to figure this out and move into it slowly. But for me, this was an incredibly effective protocol. For me, it helped me lose a lot of weight. Now, of course, you can eat 20 pints of ice cream in 8 hours, so you wouldn't lose weight if you did that.
Right.
But, if you become more conscious and mindful about
Mhm.
not stuffing your face every minute of the day, um, you will generally lose weight. But there's all of these other incredible uh, benefits to doing that. So, that was one thing that I focused on. Another thing was like I looked at my wall and I saw this really wonderful, innovative digital thermometer or thermostat that could keep me at a snuggly little 72 degrees at all times. Isn't that nice? Um, but doing that, I wasn't leveraging all of these adaptive mechanisms that are part of my evolution. Like 12,000 years ago on the Serengeti of East Africa, I had to endure big fluctuations in temperature. And
Mhm.
in fact, you obviously the dose makes the poison, right? You don't want to be hypothermic or hyperthermic, but the
Mhm.
right dosage of extreme heat or extreme cold actually activates all of these longevity and resilience pathways in the human body. So I began to experiment with exposure to heat and to cold. And
Mhm.
that had incredible benefits. I mean, for a whole bunch of physiological benefits. But if you're thinking about the brain, for example, getting in cold water will activate the production and release of dopamine over a 48-hour period after the session itself. Um, so, for
Mhm.
mood regulation, um, getting in cold water and challenging yourself to do hard things like that
Mm-hmm.
can really yield a tremendous amount of benefits. Getting into extreme heat, like if you get into a sauna, for example, 4 times a week for about 20 minutes at about 180, 190 degrees Fahrenheit, you'll see a all host of benefits, including the production of a particular kind of protein called brain-derived neurotropic factor. You're probably familiar with it, called BDNF.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular molecule helps neurons function and also stimulates the production of new neurons, neurobiogenesis, later in life even. We used to think for 50 years that our brains were essentially were fixed by after the time we were 25. Well, thankfully, this emerging field of neuroplasticity has come around. And yes, our brains are a lot more plastic and malleable, and neurons grow before, when you're younger in that period in adolescence up to the, 25, 26 years old. But now we're showing that you can engage and adopt particular activities, exercise, fasting, sauna that will actually activate the growth of new neurons later in life. And that's amazing. So
Isn't it amazing? Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Um, and so these were just a couple of things. There were really over time I kind of put together 10 core protocols that I stack into my daily life that I try to practice every day. And I'd say, like, I'm not neurotic or fundamentalist about it. I'm a, I wouldn't call myself an Epicurean, but I like to have a good time and I like to go out and be with friends. And I don't always take my last bite of food 3 hours before I go to bed, although I know that's what I should do.
Uh-huh.
Tonight, I'm actually have a wonderful dinner party with a bunch of doctors. And I'm sure we're going to hang out, and do things that are probably quote unquote not good for us, like probably have a glass of wine. But, these are some of this is why, I'm not fundamentalist about all of these things, but generally I try to, adopt these protocols and I've seen, like I said, miraculous results.
It's really awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. I too have used sauna. When I was
Hmm.
really sick, I was in a like a medical sauna program for 5 weeks, sweating heavy
Hmm.
metals and chemicals out of my body, and completely fascinated and learned so much and met so many amazing people. So I do a lot of similar protocols that you do, only I didn't find it through asking myself the same questions. Like,
Hmm.
what did they do? What did our ancestors do? Although I
Yeah,
have said we need to go back and eat the way great great grandma did. you know
absolutely.
like
Yeah.
grow your own food, have organic, organic food, eat from the earth, eat what you're supposed to be eating in the climate that you're in,
Yeah.
and for the time
Just
period that you're in. Hmm.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
cook more, just be in the kitchen more. But you're absolutely right. I mean, again, our lives have evolved for comfort and convenience, so much so that I can pick up my phone and, by the end of our conversation, I could have like a pineapple delivered to my front door, right?
Yes.
24/7, 365 days a year, whether or not it was in season or not. And, and a pineapple might be one of the better things I could have delivered, candidly, given the standard American diet that we seem to be so successful at exporting around the world.
Hmm.
Um, but there's so many things like, for example, sleep is foundational to mental health, to our psychology, to our physiology. Even one night's bad sleep can raise your insulin resistance. Now, of course, like you look at that and you try to, why does a bad night's sleep actually make you more resistant to insulin? Well, again, you almost always find the same answer. Like it's actually by design. It's like, when typically did we get less sleep 12,000 years ago? Well, in the summer, because the days were longer, we became a little bit more insulin resistant. Why? Because we wanted to, instead of using energy substrates for energy production, we wanted to store more fat in the late summer and early fall for winter again. So so almost all of when you ask yourself, why does the body do that? It always comes down to, you finding an adaptive answer to that question. But, for example, with sleep, we are once again being upended by modern culture and technology. I mean, right now, candidly, I'm surrounded by about 8 different screens, right? Um,
Yes, yes.
they're all emitting a certain band of the electromagnetic wave spectrum called blue light. And, blue light, we were designed, the sort of these neurons in the inferior part of our retina were designed to sense this particular band of light, around 380 nanometers, and through that sensitivity set our circadian rhythm through this kind
Mhm.
of chain reaction, such that cortisol in the earlier part of the day would be balanced by the secretion of melatonin from the pineal gland about 14 hours later. And that beautiful little teeter-totter was balanced by being outside in the morning and getting morning light, which is
Mhm.
blue, and then sitting around the fire with friends at night, which is amber light, um, which had no impact on your endocrine cascade. So again, the answers were right there in our history, in our evolution. So,
Mhm.
what do we do? Well, we can wake up and make our cup of tea or cup of coffee and then get outside first thing in the morning, and that can help to set our circadian rhythm. And then what do we not do? Well, we don't get that blue light at night when we want our melatonin to be secreted. And there's all sorts of kind of sleep hygiene and architecture that you can adopt around that. But a big one is, putting like a night shift function on all of your screens or putting your screens away, having more amber light in your house at night, which actually makes it feel more warm and snuggly. Anyways, being mindful about when you eat so you're not eating when you're too close to bedtime. Having a cool, excuse me, a very cool and dark room. My wife doesn't believe in heat or air conditioning, so it's interesting. So my room is very, very cold. I wake up and it's probably in the mid 50s most of the time. But anything under, 65, 64 degrees, your body is more adapted, again, for obvious reasons, to sleep when it's cool.
Mhm.
So again, in some ways, it's just asking yourself all those questions. How did I evolve, and how do I align myself with my biology?
Love that. Love that. Makes so much sense. Makes so much sense. Hey, tell us about your book. You got an online course called Good Stress. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, Good Stress is my course on commune. So I'm feeling a little imposter syndrome given who else is on there. Mark Hyman and Gabor Mate and Zach Bush and Marianne Williamson and Deepak Chopra and Sadhguru and all these incredible folks that have influenced me so much. But there I am with my own course, and it's really a distillation of everything that I've learned from my 400 plus interviews into a very clear program that people can adopt into their life, that is made up of these, what I call good stressors. Some people think of them as adversity mimetics, essentially
Mhm.
mimicking forms of adversity, Paleolithic adversity, like I've talked about. And I explain how to do them, the specific protocols themselves. I explain many of the benefits. And, it's funny, Louise, in many cases, many of these protocols have, spiritual and very old roots.
Mhm.
There are, of course, newfangled hyperbaric chambers and ozone therapy and cryotherapy um, and those are cool. And there's plenty of interesting people that are experimenting with those. I tend to focus more on the old and the true. And it is interesting how often they're baked into, our oldest traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus and the Buddha and Muhammad were all uh, fasters, and those that fasting is really built into a lot of traditions. And there's a real deep spiritual component of fasting, candidly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's funny, as I began to adopt that protocol, um, I began to witness um, my hunger in a different way. And, Viktor Frankl, wonderful author who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, you know, he said most famously that, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our freedom, our liberation. And so, you know, when I was hungry before I adopted a fasting protocol, I wouldn't think about it. I would just mindlessly meander over to the cupboard and just grab whatever was in there, and
Mm-hmm.
snack away. But because I became sort of a disciple to, this particular practice, I couldn't do that. So I had to witness the nature of the stimulus, the hunger, and then wait and cultivate a certain kind of space. And in that space, I was
Mm-hmm.
able to really witness that hunger and delineate between whether it was a biological need or an emotional or psychological desire.
Good question.
And most of the time, it was the latter. Most of the
Mm-hmm.
time, it was because I was bored, or, someone said something mean about me on Instagram, or, I was eating my feelings, or, there was some other reason for me being there that was psychological or emotional in front of the fridge. And, that capacity to find the space between the stimulus, the hunger, and the response, the stuffing of my face, um, really became incredibly protein and useful in other parts of my life, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because if I could find that space as it pertained to food, I could also leverage it for technology or for shopping or for honestly how I, relate with my children of like, okay, they would do something that would irritate me. Okay, that was the stimulus. My response, my immediate reaction would be to get really mad, but in cultivating the space before you would get mad, you would say like, okay, what is the nature of their behavior right now? And what is the best response that I could have,
Mm.
in reaction to that behavior? And so, that's why I kind of qualify the practice of fasting as very psychological and somewhat spiritual, because you do find a tremendous amount of freedom and liberation in that space, in that ability to witness the nature of stimulus, such that you can respond appropriately and in an emotionally regulated way.
Yeah, I love that. And gosh, years ago I had a client who came back from China and she had worked with a healer over there. And he told her, he said, you heal in the spaces.
Mm,
I never
yeah.
ever forgot that, Jeff. And as you're talking about the space that you want to create in all different places, not just with the hunger, right? But in your life with your kids and everything else, I just really believe we do heal in the spaces, and it's about creating space for ourselves in all areas of our life. And I also believe that there's a space in the crevices of the brain
Mm,
that's been unexplored. And
mm-hmm,
I've explored that. That's where we really do have the emotions and the traumas of the past get stuck. And when we clear them at the brain soul level, it like brings people back to being aligned, to being 100% their soul truth. So we're
mm,
very much aligned spiritually as you're explaining this to me and where you're coming from. I'm like, way cool. Like I'm in like way cool.
yeah.
That's where I'm
Well,
sitting. And I talk to myself a lot. I think you do too, and you ask yourself good questions.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, thanks. Yeah. I
Yes.
mean, I think health in all of its expressions, spiritually, psychologically, physiologically, it tends to be a reflection of our ability to bounce back, essentially our ability to
Mhm.
find balance, centeredness, homeostasis, equilibrium. There's a lot of words for it.
Mhm.
And the body again is very engineered to do that physiologically. Um, excuse me. Our liver like titrates just perfectly when it's working well to just have the right amount of glucose in the bloodstream. We have this perfect little acid base, acid alkaline balance in the body that almost never deviates. So there's all these, we have excitatory neurotransmitters and inhibitory neurotransmitters, et cetera, that, you know,
Mhm.
when we're kind of in a place, um, of centeredness that again these things find their balance. So
Mhm.
well, I think one of the quests for our psychology and spirituality is always finding that ability to come back to center, and
Mhm.
we call it, we see that in spiritual traditions, in Zen, and it's often thought of as centeredness, or in Buddhism, we see it as equipoise or equanimity, etc.
Mhm.
Um, and uh, and really, I think that is often should be like the target of our various practices is, refining that ability to foster homeostasis or balance, in your spirituality, in your spiritual life, in your psychology, and in your physiology. And in many ways, like the protocols that I have codified are really just that. They are the protocols that foster balance
Mhm.
across, all of the different components of what it means to be alive.
That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Hey, let's turn the tables a little bit here and ask you a couple personal questions. What do you do when you're not working? You're always interviewing people. I know you do amazing amount of research. Let's get to know Jeff on the other side here. So what do you do in your free time?
Yeah, well, I am, the a heedful husband. My wife and I have been together for 36 years. We work together and play together quite a bit. There's no one I'd rather really spend time with. So we take a lot of walks, and we just talk through things and find creative ideas. And we tend to work together creatively in our own lanes. So that's a source of great gratification for me. And then, I'm a doting dad. I have three daughters, three teenage daughters. So I also have a cabin and a shotgun. Uh, and one of them's off to college, and then two are home. And the two that are home are avid dancers. So I'm often shuttling kids around to weekend dance competitions. Um, and that's simultaneously awful and wonderful. Um, and then just in my personal life, I'm a musician, very amateur, but I can clunk out maybe 50 or 60 standards on the piano. So I love the old jazz American songbook. So I learn a lot of those songs, and I'm a tennis player, so I'm still avidly playing competitive tennis, um, which is a great way to get out of my head and to find flow and to spend be outside and be moving, and generally spend time with with like-minded people who like rackets.
That is so awesome. It has been such a delight to get to know you today. I'm really excited for all the work that you're doing on your masterclass, your commune platform. How can we access your good stress class on that platform?
Sure, yeah. So if you go to one commune, so that's ONE commune.com, good stress / good stress, or just go to the onecommune.com, you'll see it right there. And you can just click in and register just with your email, and you get half of it for free. So you get the first 5 sessions for free. I think in the first 5 sessions, I cover in some great depth fasting, exercise, and resistance training in particular, hot therapy like sauna, deliberate cold therapy like ice baths and cold showers. And so you can go there and sign up, and and you'll get access, like I said, for free for 5 days, or for 5 sessions. And then my podcast is called Commune, and it's on all the various podcatchers. So if you're interested in hearing from people 20 times smarter than I am, that's where you'll find them. I conduct a lot of interviews there, some very fascinating people. And like you said, I write a weekly Sunday essay that tends to be kind of humorous and sometimes emotional. And you can get that just by signing up for on the Commune platform, and that's just free. You just get it every Sunday, and it's a fun read. Um, and yeah, that's most of my life. I'm on Instagram, sort of waxing alternately pathetic and poetic at me at Jeff Krasno. So if people do um, roam the Serengeti of social media, that's mostly where I am on Instagram.
Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you so much for your time today and all your wisdom. This has just been amazing and delightful. And you guys definitely want to check out, go to onecommune.com/good stress and get Jeff's class here and listen to some of those amazing interviews on his podcast. He's a wealth of information and connection. So thanks again for being with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Louise. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your community.
Yeah, it's been really great. So gosh, we could go on forever. I can just feel it. I could
Well,
just sort of feel it.
to
So
be continued then, to be
yeah, to be
continued.
continued, maybe. Yeah, absolutely. So everyone remember, follow your heart, but take your brain with you.